The knock was so soft I almost missed it, a tentative tapping against my apartment door that was nearly lost to the sound of the rain lashing against my window pane. I wasn't expecting anyone. I never was. My life was a curated collection of quiet nights, the company of books, and the low hum of the city a comfortable 10 floors below. I figured it was a package delivery left at the wrong door, a common enough mistake in our building. I padded to the door in my socks, my hand already reaching to turn the deadbolt when I paused, a flicker of caution that was more habit than genuine fear. I peered through the peephole, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Ethan, my neighbor from 3B, the man whose laugh I could sometimes hear through the vents, a low, rumbling sound that always made me pause whatever I was doing. The man I'd spent more time than was healthy watching from my own window as he came and went, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, a constant, easy confidence in his stride. My straight neighbor. I opened the door, and the curated quiet of my world shattered. He stood there soaked. Rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and his gray t-shirt, the one I knew had a small, faded university logo on the chest, was dark with it. He wasn't smiling his usual easy grin. His shoulders were slumped, a kind of exhaustion clinging to him that seemed deeper than just the weather. He looked past me, his gaze sweeping over the warm, lamplit space of my living room as if it were a port in a storm. His eyes, usually a bright, clear blue, were shadowed. "Can I crash?" he asked, his voice low and raspy, barely more than a whisper. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with everything he wasn't saying. I just stared, my brain short-circuiting. Ethan, in my doorway, asking to come in. I'd lived next to him for 2 years. Our interactions were limited to brief, polite encounters in the hallway or the elevator. "Hey, man," he'd say with a nod. "How's it going?" I'd reply, my own voice always feeling a little too tight, a little too formal. I'd constructed an entire persona for him in my mind, built from these fleeting moments and the snippets of his life that bled through the walls. The muffled sound of a football game, the scent of his girlfriend's cloying perfume in the hallway, the occasional low murmur of an argument that would abruptly cut off. He was a part of my landscape, a fixed point of longing I had organized my lonely orbit around. And now, that fixed point had broken free and drifted to my door. My silence stretched for a beat too long. I saw a flicker of regret, of embarrassment, cross his face. He started to pull back, to raise a hand in a gesture of dismissal. "Sorry, man, forget it. It's late." "Dumb question, no," I said, the word coming out faster than I intended. "No, it's fine. Come in." I stepped back, pulling the door wider, a silent invitation. He hesitated for another second, his gaze meeting mine, and in that moment, I saw a raw vulnerability there that I had never seen before. It was like seeing the sun eclipsed, a familiar celestial body suddenly revealing a hidden, darker core. He gave a small, grateful nod and slipped inside, bringing the chill of the storm and the scent of wet pavement with him. He moved past me, his shoulder brushing mine, and the brief point of contact was like a static shock, a sudden jolt of electricity that traveled straight down my spine. He stood dripping on my entryway rug, looking lost and out of place amidst my carefully ordered books and minimalist furniture. He ran a hand through his wet hair, sending a spray of droplets onto the hardwood floor. "Sorry about the mess," he mumbled, gesturing to the puddle forming at his feet. "Don't worry about it," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I was trying to process the sheer physicality of him being here, in my space. He was taller than I'd realized, broader. He filled the room in a way I hadn't anticipated. My apartment, which had always felt like a perfectly sized sanctuary for one, suddenly felt small, crowded with his presence. You can take the couch." I gestured vaguely toward the living room. It was a long, comfortable sofa, the one place in my apartment that wasn't stark and modern. It was my one concession to comfort, and now I was offering it to him. "Thanks, Leo," he said, using my name. It sounded different coming from him, less like a label and more like an anchor. He looked at me again, a real look this time, not the polite, passing glance of the hallway. "Seriously, you're saving me right now?" I just nodded, unable to form a coherent sentence. My mind was a frantic buzz of questions. Why was he here? What happened with his girlfriend, Chloe? Her laughter, high and sharp, was another sound I was used to hearing through the walls. I didn't hear it tonight. All I heard now was the sound of Ethan's damp t-shirt clinging to his skin, the soft squelch of his sneakers on my rug. "Let me get you a towel," I said, finally finding my voice. It was a practical thought, a lifeline in a sea of overwhelming emotion. I retreated to the linen closet, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pulled out my fluffiest towel, the one I saved for myself, and a spare blanket. I also grabbed an old t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants, clothes that I knew would be too small for him, but were better than nothing. When I came back, he had taken off his wet jacket and draped it over the back of a dining chair. His t-shirt was plastered to his chest and back, outlining the hard muscles of his torso. I tried very hard not to stare. I held the items out to him. "Here, you can change in the bathroom." He took them from me, his fingers brushing against mine. Another jolt. His skin was cold from the rain. "Thanks," he said again, his voice still rough. He disappeared down the short hallway, and I was left alone in the living room, the silence now charged with his presence. I could hear the soft click of the bathroom door, the rush of water as he turned on the sink. I stood there, frozen, just listening to the sounds of him moving around in my home. It was the most surreal moment of my life. For 2 years, Ethan had been a fantasy, a character in a story I told only to myself. He was the handsome, unattainable neighbor, a symbol of a life I watched from a distance but could never be a part of. He belonged to a world of easy camaraderie, of weekend barbecues, of a beautiful girlfriend, and a future that was probably already mapped out. My world was one of quiet observation, of art galleries visited alone, of a longing so deep and persistent it had become a part of my own architecture. Now, the wall between those two worlds had dissolved, and he was here, in my bathroom, wearing my clothes. He emerged a few minutes later, the towel slung around his neck. My gray t-shirt was stretched tight across his chest, and the sweatpants ended a few inches above his ankles, a slightly comical sight that somehow only made him more real, more human. He'd toweled his hair, and it was starting to curl slightly at the ends. He looked younger without the weight of the world on his shoulders, but the exhaustion was still there, settled deep in his eyes. "Better?" I asked. He nodded, managing a small, tired smile. "1,000 times. I owe you 1 inch." He walked over to the couch and sank into it, the cushions sighing under his weight. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes, a long breath escaping his lips. I watched the line of his throat, the way his chest rose and fell. It was an impossibly intimate sight. I felt like an intruder in my own home. "Do you want to talk about it?" The question was out before I could stop it. It was too forward, too presumptuous. We weren't friends. We were just neighbors. He opened his eyes and looked at me. His gaze was steady, unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing, and I was sure I had overstepped. Then he spoke, his voice flat. "Chloe and I are done, just like that." A simple, declarative statement that explained everything and nothing at all. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry" felt hollow and insincere. I wasn't sorry. The selfish, hopeful part of me, the part one kept locked away, was anything but sorry. "Don't be," he said, as if reading my mind. "It's for the best. It's been coming for a long time." He scrubbed a hand over his face. I couldn't be in that apartment tonight." Hearing her pack, I just had to get out." He looked around my living room again, his eyes lingering on the neat stacks of art books on my coffee table, the abstract painting I'd done that hung over my desk. "Your place is quiet," he said. It sounded like the highest compliment he could offer. "It is," I agreed. We fell into another silence, but this one felt different. It was less awkward, more companionable. The storm outside raged on, a dramatic soundtrack to the quiet drama unfolding in my apartment. I watched him, this man I had idealized from afar, now looking so broken and weary on my couch. The fantasy was colliding with reality, and the result was something far more compelling, far more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart. "I'm going to try to get some sleep," he said finally, his voice thick with fatigue. He shifted, pulling the blanket I'd given him up over his shoulders. He was long, his feet hanging off the end of the sofa, but he curled into himself, trying to make himself smaller. "Okay," I whispered. "Let me know if you need anything." I turned to go to my own room, to leave him to his thoughts. "Leo," he said, his voice stopping me. I turned back. He was looking at me, his blue eyes dark in the dim light. "Thank you, anytime." I said, and the sincerity in my own voice surprised me. I meant it. I would have given him anything in that moment. I retreated to my bedroom and closed the door, leaning against it, my heart a wild, frantic bird in my chest. I could hear the sound of him shifting on the couch, the rustle of the blanket. I could feel his presence through the wall, a low, constant hum of energy that my apartment had never known. Sleep, I knew, would be a long time coming. I spent the night listening to the sound of my straight neighbor breathing in my living room, and I wondered if my life would ever be the same. The next morning, I woke to a foreign and intoxicating smell. Coffee. Not my usual bitter, dark roast, but something richer, sweeter. I lay in bed for a moment, disoriented, the events of the previous night feeling like a strange dream. Then I heard it, a soft clink of ceramic, the low hum of someone moving around in my kitchen. Ethan. It wasn't a dream. I swung my legs out of bed, my heart starting its familiar nervous patter. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a clean shirt, running a hand through my messy hair in a futile attempt to look presentable. I felt an absurd flush of anxiety, like I was about to go on a first date. I took a deep breath and opened my bedroom door. He was standing at my counter, his back to me, wearing the same two small clothes from last night. He was pouring coffee into two of my mugs, the mismatched ones I'd picked up at a thrift store. The morning light streamed in through the large living room window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and catching the highlights in his dark hair. It was a scene of such profound domesticity that it made my chest ache. He must have heard my floorboard creak, because he turned, a mug in each hand. A slow smile spread across his face, and this time, it reached his eyes. The exhaustion from last night was gone, replaced by a weary but genuine warmth. "Morning," he said. Hope you don't mind. I made coffee. Figured it was the least I could do. I don't mind at all, I said, my voice still thick with sleep. Thank you. He held one of the mugs out to me. I walked over and took it, our fingers brushing again. This time the touch was warmer, less of a shock, and more of a slow burn. I brought the mug to my lips, the steam warming my face. He'd found the sugar and the milk, had made it just how I liked it, though he couldn't possibly have known that. It was probably just how he took his own. The coffee was perfect. So, I started, leaning against the counter opposite him, trying to seem casual. What's the plan? He took a long sip of his own coffee, his gaze directed out the window at the rain-washed city. I don't know, he admitted, his voice quiet. I need to find a new place. I can't go back there, he looked at me. I was going to crash with my buddy Mark, but he's out of town for the week. I don't suppose. I mean, I can pay you, he trailed off, the question hanging in the air. He wanted to stay? Here. With me. For a few more days. My brain screamed 1,000 different warnings. It was too much, too fast, too dangerous. My carefully constructed solitude was about to be invaded in the most profound way. But my heart, that foolish, traitorous organ, gave a single, resounding answer. You can stay, I heard myself say, as long as you need. And don't be ridiculous. You don't have to pay me. A wave of visible relief washed over his face. The tension in his shoulders seemed to melt away. Leo, man, I don't know what to say. You sure? I'm sure, I said, and the words felt true. I wasn't sure about anything, but in that moment, the thought of him leaving, of my apartment returning to its empty silence, was unbearable. So he stayed. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. We fell into an easy, unspoken rhythm. I'd wake up to the smell of coffee. We'd sit in comfortable silence, drinking from our respective mugs, watching the city wake up. I worked from home, a graphic designer tethered to my laptop, so I'd retreat to my small office space while he spent his days on his phone, apartment hunting. He was a personal trainer, and he took a few clients at a downtown gym in the afternoons. In the evenings, he'd come back, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, smelling of sweat and clean soap. I started making enough dinner for two. It was a simple adjustment, but it felt monumental. I learned that he hated mushrooms, but would eat almost anything else. I learned that he liked old movies, the black and white kind I usually watched alone. We sat on the couch one night, a bowl of popcorn between us, and watched Casablanca. I was acutely aware of the space between us, the scant inches separating his thigh from mine. I could feel the warmth radiating off his body. I could smell the faint scent of his deodorant, a clean, sharp smell that was quickly becoming my favorite scent in the world. I spent my days in a state of heightened awareness. Every small thing he did was magnified, analyzed, and stored away. I noticed the way he chewed on his lower lip when he was concentrating on his phone. I noticed the way he always left his shoes perfectly aligned by the door. I noticed the tiny scar that bisected his left eyebrow, and I wondered, obsessively, how he'd gotten it. He was an observer, too. I'd look up from my laptop and find him watching me, a curious, unreadable expression on his face. "What?" I'd ask, my skin prickling under his gaze. He'd just shake his head and smile. "Nothing. Just. You get really focused when you work. It's cool." One afternoon, he came and stood behind me while I was working on a logo design. He leaned in close to look at the screen, his chest brushing against my back. My breath hitched. I could feel the heat of him, smell the coffee on his breath. "That's really good," he said, his voice a low rumble so close to my ear. "You're really talented." I mumbled a thank you, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. My entire body was on fire. He lingered there for a moment too long, his hand resting on the back of my chair. It wasn't a sexual touch, not explicitly, but it was intimate. It was a gesture of familiarity, of comfort, that we hadn't earned. And yet, it felt completely natural. The lines were blurring. He wasn't just my neighbor anymore. He was my roommate. My friend. The word felt inadequate. The tension between us was a living thing, a low-level hum that vibrated in the air whenever we were in the same room. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. He was straight. He'd just gotten out of a serious relationship. He was vulnerable, and I was just a convenient, safe place for him to land. I was projecting my own desperate longing onto his simple acts of friendship. But then there were moments, small, fleeting moments, that made me question everything. One evening, I was cooking, and he came up behind me to grab a glass from the cupboard. He reached over me, his arm caging me in against the counter. He could have just asked me to move, but he didn't. He paused. His body pressed against mine for a split second, and I heard him take a sharp, quiet breath. Then he was gone, and I was left standing there, my heart hammering, the scent of him all around me. I was losing my mind. This man, this beautiful, kind, and impossibly straight man, was unintentionally dismantling all of my defenses. My quiet, ordered life had been thrown into chaos, and I found that I didn't want it to ever go back to the way it was before. I was terrified, and I was hopeful. It was a dizzying, dangerous combination. The storm that had brought Ethan to my door passed, but another one was gathering, this one inside the four walls of my apartment. And I had a sinking feeling that when this one broke, I was going to be right in the eye of it. On the 5th day of Ethan's stay, a Saturday, the power went out. It wasn't a flicker, but a sudden, definitive plunge into darkness and silence. The low hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of my laptop, the distant city noises, all of it vanished, leaving a heavy, profound quiet in its wake. We were in the middle of the living room, a half-finished game of Scrabble on the coffee table between us. The sudden darkness was absolute. "Whoa." Ethan's voice came out of the blackness, startlingly close. "Guess that's game. I was winning anyway," I said, my voice trying for a lightness I didn't feel. My heart was pounding. The darkness had changed the dynamic of the room instantly. It felt smaller, more intimate. His presence, which was already a constant, overwhelming force, now seemed to be the only other thing in the universe. "In your dreams, Leo," he chuckled. I heard him shift on the couch. "You got any candles?" "Yeah, in the kitchen. Junk drawer." I started to stand up, my hands outstretched, feeling my way toward the kitchen. A moment later, his hand found my arm. His grip was warm and firm, a steadying presence in the disorienting dark. "Careful," he said, his voice low. "Let me." I've got my phone." A second later, a bright beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating his face. He was closer than I thought. His expression was serious, his eyes focused on me. He didn't let go of my arm. My skin tingled where he touched me. He led the way to the kitchen, the small circle of light from his phone dancing over the familiar surfaces of my apartment. It felt like we were explorers in a strange, new land. He found the junk drawer and rummaged through it, finally producing a handful of tea lights and a book of matches. He set them up on the coffee table, and soon, a small collection of flickering flames pushed back the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. We sat back down on the couch, the Scrabble board forgotten. The candlelight softened the angles of his face, making him look younger, more vulnerable. The city outside was eerily quiet, the usual ambient light pollution gone. We could see the stars, faint but present, through my large window. "It's kinda nice," he said, his voice hushed, as if not to disturb the quiet. "Peaceful it is," I agreed. We sat in silence for a while, just watching the candle flames. The easy rhythm we had developed over the past few days felt different now, charged with a new kind of intensity. The distractions were gone. There was no TV, no phones, no work. There was just us. And the silence. "So," he said, breaking the quiet. He turned to face me, his arm resting on the back of the couch, his body angled toward mine. Chloe called, my stomach twisted. "Oh." I kept my voice neutral, my gaze fixed on the candles. "Yeah. She wants to talk." He said the word with a kind of weary disdain. "Wants her stuff. Wants to know where I am." "What did you tell her?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I told her I was staying with a friend," he said. He paused, and I could feel his eyes on me. "And that I'd get her stuff when I was ready. But not today, a friend." The word echoed in the quiet room. It was what we were, I supposed. But it felt like a cheap imitation of what was really growing between us. I risked a glance at him. He was still watching me, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Are you happy, Leo?" he asked, the question coming out of nowhere. It was so direct, so unexpected, that it completely disarmed me. I blinked. "What? Are you happy?" he repeated, his voice soft but insistent. "I mean, you have this great place, you're an amazing artist, you seem to have your life all figured out. But, are you happy?" No one had ever asked me that before. Not like that. Not with such genuine, searching curiosity. I thought about my life before he had knocked on my door. The quiet solitude, the carefully ordered routine. It was safe. It was controlled. But was it happy? "I'm content," I said finally. It was the most honest answer I could give. Or I was his brow furrowed. I took a breath. This was dangerous territory. But the darkness, the candlelight, his proximity, it all conspired to pull the truth from me. "It's just quiet," I said, looking around my shadowed apartment. "My life. It's always been very quiet," he nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I get that," he said. "Mine was the opposite. It was loud. So much noise. Parties we didn't want to go to, friends of hers I couldn't stand, fighting about stupid things just to fill the silence." He looked down at his hands. "I think I was so scared of being alone. I forgot what quiet even sounded like." He looked up at me again, his blue eyes seeming to glow in the candlelight. "Until I came here, my heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest." The air was thick with unspoken things. The space between us on the couch, which had felt like a chasm just minutes before, now felt like a single, shared breath. He leaned in, just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough to make the world tilt on its axis. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a low murmur that vibrated through me. "I wasn't just running from Chloe the other night, you weren't." I whispered. He shook his head, his eyes never leaving mine. "I was running to something. I just didn't know what it was." He paused, and the silence stretched, taut and electric. I think maybe I was running here. This is it. My brain is screaming. This is the moment where I either pull back and retreat to the safety of my quiet, lonely life, or I lean into the terrifying, exhilarating possibility in front of me. I am frozen, caught between a lifetime of fear and a single, desperate hope. He searches my face, looking for something. Permission? Reassurance? I don't know what he sees there, but his gaze softens, and a small, sad smile touches his lips. He starts to pull back, and I can't let him. I don't think. I just act. I close the small distance between us, my hand coming up to cup his jaw. His skin is warm, a little rough with stubble. He freezes, his eyes widening in surprise. His lips part slightly. I can feel his breath on my face, warm and smelling faintly of coffee and something that is just. "Ethan." "Leo." He breathes. My name a question and a plea all at once. And then I kiss him. It's not a gentle kiss. It's clumsy and desperate, born of years of pent-up longing and a week of unbearable, delicious tension. It's a collision of fear and hope, of uncertainty and a deep, gut-level certainty that this is right. This is what I have been waiting for my entire life. For a split second, he is completely still, and a cold dread washes over me. I've made a terrible mistake. I've misread everything. I've ruined the one good thing that has ever happened to me. I start to pull away, my face burning with shame. But then, his hand comes up to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, and he is kissing me back. And his kiss is not clumsy. It is slow and deep and sure. It is a kiss of discovery, of confirmation. It is the sound of a lock clicking into place, of a door swinging open. It is a question and an answer, all at the same time. The world narrows to this single point of contact. The taste of him, the feel of his lips against mine, the rough scrape of his stubble, the firm grip of his hand in my hair. The candles flicker, casting our shadows, large and intertwined, against the wall. The power could stay out forever, for all I cared. In that moment, in the dark, with his lips on mine, I had all the light I would ever need. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We rested our foreheads together, the candle flames dancing in our eyes. Neither of us spoke. There were no words for what had just happened. It was a language spoken in touch and breath and the frantic beating of two hearts. "So," he said finally, his voice a low, rough whisper. He let out a shaky laugh. "I guess I'm not so straight after all." I laughed too, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "I guess not." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his expression serious now, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice full of a vulnerability I had never heard from him before. "This is new for me, Leo. It's new for me too," I admitted. "Having someone here like this." I met his gaze, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. "It's more than okay, Ethan. It's everything." He smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. He leaned in and kissed me again, and this time it was different. It was slower, more tender. It was a promise. It was a beginning. The quiet of my apartment was no longer the sound of loneliness. It was the sound of peace. It was the sound of us. I woke the next morning to an empty bed. For a disoriented second, panic seized me, cold and sharp. The memory of the previous night, of the candlelight and the kisses and the soft murmur of his voice in the dark, felt like a dream, fragile and ephemeral. I had convinced him to take my bed, arguing that my back was more used to the couch than his. We had fallen asleep facing each other, his hand loosely holding mine. The feeling of his skin against mine had been the last thing I was aware of before drifting off. Now, the space beside me was cold. He was gone. The thought slammed into me with physical force. He regretted it. He'd woken up in the clear light of day and realized what a mistake he'd made. He'd fled back to his old life, to his straight life, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my own hope. I sat up, the blanket pooling around my waist. The power was back on. The digital clock on my cable box glowed a cheerful, mocking green. 7:16 a.m. The apartment was silent. Too silent. I swung my legs out of bed, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I had to know for sure. I walked into the living room. The couch where I had spent the last several nights was empty. The blanket I'd used folded neatly at one end. His duffel bag, which had been sitting by the door, was gone. His shoes were gone. A wave of nausea rolled through me. He had packed up his few belongings and left without a word. I felt stupid. So incredibly, profoundly stupid. How could I have been so naive? I had let my loneliness, my desperation, build him into something he wasn't. I had projected my fantasies onto him, and he had, in a moment of vulnerability and confusion, played along. But morning always comes. Reality always sets in. I walked over to the large window and looked out at the city, my chest a hollow, aching void. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the storm that was raging inside me. I had let him in, not just into my apartment, but into my life, into my heart. And he had walked away, leaving the door wide open. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, closing my eyes, trying to breathe through the pain. Then I heard it, the soft click of my front door opening. My head snapped up. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. Ethan stood in the doorway, a cardboard tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee in one hand and a white paper bag in the other. He was wearing a fresh set of clothes, jeans and a dark blue Henley that I'd never seen before. He must have gone back to his old apartment. He stopped when he saw me, his smile faltering as he took in my expression. "Hey," he said, his voice cautious. "You're up early." He kicked the door shut behind him. "I went on a coffee run. And I got those croissants you like from the place down the street." I just stared at him, unable to speak. My mind was struggling to catch up with this new reality. He hadn't left. He had gone out to get us breakfast. He had remembered the name of the bakery I'd mentioned in passing 2 days ago. He had come back. He set the coffee and the bag on the kitchen counter and walked over to me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Leo? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I thought you left?" I whispered, the words raw and brittle. His face softened with understanding. He reached out and cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking my cheekbones. His hands were warm, solid, real. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." I met his gaze. His blue eyes were clear and steady. "I didn't run," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I'm not going to run. I woke up early, and my head was a mess. In a good way. A terrifying, amazing way. I needed to walk. I needed to breathe. And I wanted to get you croissants." A single, traitorous tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. He wiped it away with his thumb. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have left a note." "I didn't think." "It's okay," I said, my voice thick. I jumped to conclusions." "I get it," he said. He leaned in and pressed a soft, gentle kiss to my forehead. It was an impossibly tender gesture, more intimate than any of the passionate kisses we had shared the night before. "This is all new," he murmured against my skin. "We're going to be clumsy. We're going to get scared. But we're going to talk. Okay? No more jumping to conclusions." I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. He pulled me into a hug, wrapping his strong arms around me, and I buried my face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, fresh air, coffee, and that clean, sharp smell that was uniquely his. I felt his chin rest on the top of my head. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms in the middle of my sun-drenched living room, and the hollow ache in my chest was replaced by a warm, glowing feeling of profound relief. He wasn't a dream. He was real, and he was here. Just as we were finally untangling ourselves, a sharp, insistent knock echoed from the front door. We both froze, looking at each other. My apartment door had seen more action in the last week than it had in the previous 2 years combined. "Were you expecting someone?" Ethan asked, his voice low. I shook my head. "Never." The knock came again, louder this time, more demanding. "Ethan, I know you're in there. Your car is downstairs. Open the door." It was a woman's voice. "Hi," sharp and familiar. "Chloe." Ethan's face hardened. He let out a long, weary sigh and ran a hand through his hair. "Damn it," he muttered. He looked at me, his eyes full of apology. "I'm so sorry about this." "It's okay," I said, though my stomach was a knot of anxiety. "What do you want to do?" He looked from me to the door, then back again. A flicker of resolve crossed his face. "I want to handle this," he said. "Right now? Get it over with." He squeezed my arm reassuringly. "It'll just take a minute." He walked to the door and opened it. Chloe stood on the other side, her arms crossed over her chest, her face a mask of angry impatience. She was exactly as I had pictured her from her photos on Ethan's social media. Perfectly manicured, perfectly coiffed, radiating a kind of brittle, high-maintenance energy. Her eyes, however, widened in surprise when she saw me standing behind Ethan. Her gaze flickered between us, a slow, dawning comprehension spreading across her features. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. "Who is he?" "This is Leo," Ethan said, his voice calm and steady. He didn't move from his position, effectively blocking her from entering my apartment. "He's my friend. I've been staying with him." "A friend?" she scoffed, her eyes raking over me with disdain. She looked back at Ethan. "You leave me, you don't answer my calls for days, and you're shacking up with him." "We're done, Chloe," Ethan said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I told you that. What I do now is none of your business." "None of my business," she shrieked, her voice rising. "We were together for 3 years, Ethan. You owe me an explanation. Is this what it's about? Is this why you left? Are you—" She couldn't even bring herself to say the word, her face contorting in disgust. I felt a flush of heat rise in my cheeks. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards. This was my nightmare, a public confrontation, a scene, my private life laid bare for judgment. But Ethan didn't flinch. He stood his ground, a solid, immovable wall between her and me. "What this is about," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "is that I wasn't happy. And you weren't either. This has nothing to do with Leo. This has to do with us. And us is over. He stepped out into the hallway, pulling my door partially shut behind him, shielding me from the rest of the conversation. I could still hear their muffled voices, Chloe's rising in pitch, Ethan's remaining low and firm. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I had seen everything I needed to see in the way he had looked at me before he stepped outside, in the way he had protected me. A few minutes later, I heard the sharp click of Chloe's heels retreating down the hallway, followed by the sound of my door opening and closing again. Ethan leaned against it, his eyes closed, his shoulders slumped. He looked drained, as if he'd just run a marathon. I walked over to him, my heart aching for him. "Are you okay?" He opened his eyes and looked at me. A small, tired smile touched his lips. "Yeah," he said. "I am." He pushed himself off the door and walked toward me. "Actually," he said, his smile widening slightly, "I think I'm better than okay." He reached out and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. His grip was strong and sure. "That's over," he said, as much to himself as to me. "That part of my life. It's really over." He looked down at our joined hands, then back up at me, his eyes full of a new, clear light. "Now I can figure out what's next." He didn't have to say anything else. I knew what he meant. The "what's next" was standing right in front of him. It was us. The croissants were forgotten on the counter, the coffee growing cold. But it didn't matter. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, we stood together in the middle of my living room, hand in hand, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The week that followed Chloe's dramatic appearance was one of quiet discovery. With the final thread to his old life severed, Ethan seemed lighter, more present. The weary tension that had clung to him since his arrival finally dissipated, replaced by a relaxed, easy confidence that I was quickly learning was his natural state. Our tentative, fragile connection, forged in darkness and uncertainty, began to solidify in the daylight. We spent our time learning the topography of each other. Not just our bodies, though there was that, too, slow, exploratory kisses on the couch, the simple, profound intimacy of sleeping in the same bed, his arm draped possessively over my waist. But we were also mapping the landscapes of our minds, our histories. I learned that the scar on his eyebrow was from a childhood fall from a tree he wasn't supposed to be climbing. He learned about my estranged family and why I had retreated into the safe, predictable world of my art. He was fascinated by my work. He would spend hours in my small studio space, which was really just a glorified corner of my living room, watching me sketch or mix paints. He never interrupted, just observed with a quiet intensity that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. He'd ask questions, not just about my technique, but about my inspiration, about what I was trying to say with a particular brushstroke or color choice. He saw the stories in my art, the emotion I poured into the canvas, and he didn't mock it or dismiss it. He honored it. One afternoon, he found a new, empty canvas I had propped against the wall. "What's this one going to be?" he asked. I shrugged. "I don't know yet. It's just waiting for an idea." He picked up a tube of ultramarine blue, my favorite color, and handed it to me. "I have an idea," he said, his eyes sparkling with a familiar mischief. "Let's paint this room." He gestured to the stark, white walls of my living room. "It needs some color, some life." The idea was absurd. I was a painter, yes, but of canvases, not walls. The thought of the mess, the disruption to my ordered space, made my anxious mind twitch. But then I looked at his face, at the genuine, boyish excitement there, and I couldn't say no. So we went to the hardware store. It was our first real public outing as whatever we were. It felt strangely normal and utterly terrifying at the same time. I kept expecting people to stare, to point, to judge, but no one did. We were just two guys, arguing playfully over paint swatches. He wanted a deep, bold blue. I argued for something more subdued. We compromised on a rich, calming slate blue, a color that was somehow both of us, his boldness and my quiet nature, mixed together. The next day, we moved all the furniture to the center of the living room and covered it with drop cloths. Ethan put on an old playlist from his phone, a mix of classic rock and indie bands I'd never heard of, and we set to work. He was meticulous with the edging, his trainer's focus translating into a steady, precise hand. I handled the roller, covering the large swaths of white with our chosen color. We worked in a comfortable, syncopated rhythm, moving around each other in the small space with an unspoken grace. We didn't talk much, but the silence was filled with the music, the scrape of the rollers, and the occasional shared, paint-flecked smile. At one point, he came up behind me and, using his thumb, wiped a smudge of blue paint from my cheek. His touch lingered for a beat too long, his gaze warm and intense. He didn't kiss me. He just held my gaze for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the new reality we were building together, one paint stroke at a time. By the end of the day, we were exhausted, splattered with paint, and ridiculously happy. The room was transformed. The new color made the space feel warmer, more intimate, more like a home. It was no longer just my apartment. It was ours. We ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the drop cloth in the middle of the floor, leaning against the covered couch, our shoulders touching. "It looks good," he said, his voice content, as he surveyed our work. "It does," I agreed. I looked at him, at the streak of blue paint in his hair, the tired but happy smile on his face. He caught me looking, and his smile widened. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Just, this is nice." "Yeah," he said softly. "It is." A few days later, he announced that he had found a new apartment. My heart did a painful little flip-flop. I had known this was coming. He couldn't stay with me forever, but the thought of him leaving, of the apartment returning to its empty silence, was a physical ache in my chest. I tried to keep my expression neutral, to be supportive. "That's great," I said, my voice sounding impressively steady. "Where is it?" "It's just a few blocks from here," he said, watching my face carefully. "It's small, just a one-bedroom. But it's got good light." He paused. "It's available next week." "Wow," I said. "That's fast." The words felt like stones in my mouth. We were standing in the kitchen, the morning light streaming in. He took a step closer to me, closing the distance between us. He took my hands in his. "Leo," he said, his voice serious. "This doesn't change anything." "I know," I lied. He shook his head. "No, you don't. You've got that look on your face again. The one that says you think I'm going to run." He squeezed my hands. "I'm not leaving you. I'm just getting my own place. I need to stand on my own 2 feet for a bit. Figure my own stuff out. But that doesn't mean I want to be without you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, newly cut key. It glinted in the sunlight. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "It's a copy," he said. "For my new place. I want you to have it." I stared at the key in my hand. It was heavy, solid, real. It was more than just a piece of metal. It was a promise, an invitation. It was a symbol of a future I hadn't dared to dream of. "Just in case," he said, his voice soft, a small, teasing smile on his lips. "You know, in case you need to crash." I looked up at him, my eyes stinging. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a wave of emotion so powerful it stole my breath. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of coffee and promises. He was right. This wasn't an ending. It was a different kind of beginning. The day he moved his things out was bittersweet. My apartment felt cavernously empty without his duffel bag by the door, his sneakers kicked off on the rug. The silence that settled in after he left was heavy, profound. I wandered through the rooms, my hand trailing along the back of the couch where he used to sit, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the newly painted blue wall. I missed him. The ache of it was a physical presence, a hollow space in the center of my chest. I had grown so accustomed to the sound of his breathing in the next room, the smell of his coffee in the morning, the simple, solid fact of his presence. I had spent 2 years living in a quiet, self-imposed isolation, and in 2 short weeks, he had completely rewired my understanding of what it meant to be alone. I spent the evening in a state of anxious melancholy, my mind a whirlwind of doubt. Had I imagined the intensity of the past 2 weeks? Now that he had his own space, would he retreat? Would the magic of our forced proximity fade under the harsh light of everyday life? Around 10 o'clock, just as I was resigning myself to a lonely, sleepless night, I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart stopped. I walked to the door, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the knob. I opened it. Ethan stood there, a sheepish grin on his face. He was holding a pillow under one arm. "Hey," he said. "Hey." I breathed, a slow smile spreading across my own face. "So, my new place is great," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "But, the bed's not delivered until tomorrow. And the couch is really uncomfortable." He looked past me, into my apartment, his gaze soft and full of longing. It's also really quiet over there. He met my eyes, all pretense falling away. Can I crash? He asked, his voice a low, hopeful whisper. I didn't answer with words. I just stepped back, pulling the door wide open, a silent, joyful invitation. He walked in, dropping his pillow on the couch, and then he was in front of me, his hands on my waist, pulling me close. I missed you, he murmured, his lips brushing against mine. It's only been 8 hours, and I missed you too. I confessed, my arms wrapping around his neck. He kissed me, and in that kiss, all my fears, all my doubts dissolved. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. I realized then that my home wasn't these 4 walls, this collection of books and furniture. My home was him. It was the feeling of his arms around me, the sound of his heartbeat against mine. Later, as we lay in my bed, the city lights twinkling outside my window, I watched him sleep. His face was relaxed, peaceful. His arm was thrown over my chest, a warm, heavy weight that anchored me. I thought about the man who had shown up at my door 2 weeks ago, soaked and broken, a stranger I had only ever admired from a distance. And I looked at the man beside me now, his life so intricately and beautifully tangled with mine. My life was no longer quiet. It was filled with the sound of his laughter, the rhythm of his breathing, the low murmur of his voice. It was filled with the smell of his skin and the vibrant, brilliant color of his presence. He hadn't just crashed on my couch. He had crashed into my life, breaking down the walls I had so carefully built around my heart, and he had filled all the empty spaces with light. I lay there, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never be lonely again. I was home,